Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Kahn because he is willing to engage.
Don't do it! Don't do it! Carnivore and vegan doctors hash it out over heart disease. Part 2.
Dr. Kahn, do you believe that seed oils are causing inflammation issues for people?
Right, okay, so last time we left off with this, Dr. Kahn actually started to answer this question and said that they're unfairly maligned, seed oils, and he used he cited evidence from claims made by someone from Tufts University, a nutritional professor that is quote unquote considered one of the top 5 nutrition professors of all time. So let's just let him say it. The reason we stopped was because he cited Tufts University, which is a university that years ago published that little tier list, I guess you could say, of healthy of foods and ranked them in terms of health, and eggs and beef were at the very 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 bottom of the graph, and towards the top was cereal, things like, not even just like Cheerios or something that are colloquially considered healthy when they're not, but not even that. It was, the fake stuff like cinnamon toast crunch and fruity pebbles, the even more meretricious um, dopaminergic foods, which aren't foods for human beings or for any organism for that matter. So that's why we decided to stop it. But now let's continue. Let's finish this entire thing off. Why don't we do that?
No, I actually don't think they are. I think they've been maligned. I refer anybody, I hate to refer to a lay publication, but Consumer Report, May of 2022, had a great article called Do Seed Oils Make You Sick? And the major person interviewed was the head of nutrition science at Tufts University, who
Right. So there you go. So that was the primary interviewee. So do you think that we should trust someone like him or her? I don't know who it is when it comes to nutrition information at all. No, no, because I don't think so either. I don't think so either. Not to mention, it's not even just a function of her working at Tufts University. She's a she. Now I'm just saying she. He or she. They work at as a nutritionist in the first place. They are a nutritionist. That's a problem, isn't it? Because nutritionists don't understand anything about nutrition at all. They're oftentimes better than dietitians. Oh boy. Ah, but doesn't change the facts here.
Dariush Mozaffarian, who many people consider, probably the top 5 nutrition scientists.
Right. So appeal to authority.
In the country, maybe the world. And, it's the same thing with added sugar, trying to sort out, is canola oil dangerous, or is the cookie and the cake that's baked with canola oil and sugar and white flour and
I'm sorry, sugar that is completely identical to sugar found in fruit, correct? And all the stuff that you promote. So that's interesting. But also, what are the major constituents of all those things? Cake and cookies. Is it plants and carbohydrates? Not fat.
put some other ingredients in there, some preservatives and BHD,
Yeah, and that's the other thing. You don't want to fall into the fallacy of the single cause, which is believing that there's only one cause to things or one influence over a result or a conclusion or an observation. Okay, there are multiple typically because the world is a nexus of variables and influences. So it could be all of them to varying degrees. Those degrees varying person to person as well. Some people are more sensitive to grains than sugar. Like just straight up sucrose. So that's something else to consider as well. Let's break this down into really, 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 really simple terms, Dr. Kahn. How long have our genes been exposed to fat and protein from animals? Well, it's been millions of years in our speciation, including, of course, proto-humans that precede our current speciation, that being Homo sapiens sapien. Okay. So that's one thing to consider. And so then you must ask yourself the same question for sugar and grains and BHT and all those other preservatives that you were alluding to, and also canola oil. Well, the answer to those, the majority of those actually, is going to be around 100 years. For grains, that's different. However, the grains that we're speaking of are sprayed with loads of herbicides and pesticides. But even putting it aside, just regular, just grains themselves, 13,000 years. So around 11,000 BC. Tell me, Dr. Kahn, in terms of evolution, is that a long time? Is that long enough? Is that most recent amount of time sufficient enough to have caused full genotypic adaptations to our genome? Genotypic changes? No, not to mention that the rate of consumption was also not the same as it is today for grains back then. The graph kind of looks like that. Okay? In terms of rate of consumption and year or something in thousands. So anyway, Dr. Kahn, that kind of simplifies everything, doesn't it? Instead of trying to reduce things to one factor statistically, the common denominator, basically, in ways that are completely, that are always going to maintain a high level of noise because of lack of omniscience and omnipotence in human beings. So
that out and isolate it from the seed oil. When you isolate seed oils in scientific studies, the classic
no, they don't isolate seed oils in scientific studies because that would require a degree of control that isn't able to be exerted on human beings. So no, that isn't true, Dr. Kahn. That is not happening. Also, what was the sample size and therefore the statistical power? Number one, how repeatable are the results? According to the distribution of the primary outcome variable, what was the aggregate mean plus or minus standard deviation if you were to aggregate them all into a meta-analysis, assuming that the studies were all done the exact same, just on different populations of people, or what they consider subsets of the population? This stuff matters deeply, because that will give us an aggregate signal to noise ratio. Assuming, by the way, that the primary outcome variable was directly tied causally to the seed oil fluctuations or the ostensible fluctuations in seed oil consumption, because it's based on respondent data always, almost always at least, even in randomized controlled trials, because you can't control for what these people are actually eating. There's a lot of assumptions going on, and every assumption, you learn this, every assumption that you add in, that you base your conclusion on, introduces more error, and those errors don't add up, they multiply. So their variances are going to multiply. Their standard deviations are going to multiply. Okay? Okay.
which all cardiologists learn about, is the Leon Heart Trial. The Leon Heart Trial was in the
Unfamiliar. Let's hear about this.
I want to say 1970s, but maybe it's the 1990s. I apologize. I don't know their reference open, but it's just such a dominant trial. It was only about 750 patients with heart disease who were using butter, and they replaced their butter with canola oil. And the dramatic reduction in the group on canola oil.
No, not reduction. There was an associated lower incidence. That is an association. Who was to say that those people wouldn't have died at the exact same time, plus or minus a day or two, if you had done the study again, even without them replacing their butter with canola oil? Who was to say that? This is an opinion. Also, you're using value judgment statements like massive, dramatic. What were the actual numbers? What was the incidence ratio that we're talking about? Okay, also known as the hazard ratio in randomized controlled trials. We just got done dealing with this with Gil Carvalho, doing this on an epidemiological study, which actually makes the incidence ratio even less utilitarian and informative, because then your control, if it's on one population, one cohort, is in reference to another study that you probably didn't even conduct. One study that you just randomly pull out of your ass for a reference range. It's even worse. Anyway, hell, it's unbelievable.
My favorite oil. You won't find canola oil in my house, although I would use organic canola oil. It's all a GMO crop, so you're pretty much cornered into using organic canola oil if you're going to use it. You're going to find really high quality extra virgin olive oil in my house, but
again, less offensive as we covered in the last video, but still not the most optimal compared to saturated animal fat.
Data that canola oil is pro health in cardiovascular patients was dramatically exemplified in the Leon Heart trial. And then there are other studies out there. There's a very famous study that causes some of my plant based medical colleagues to give olive oil actually a bad name. It's a side topic, it's an annoyance, it's a confusing topic. But in the study, it was olive oil used to measure flow down your arteries, flow mediated dilatation. And the control group was canola oil. And interestingly, the flow down brachial arteries with canola oil went up, which would generally be considered a good thing, a vasodilatory effect of canola oil on arteries. I don't use that to tell my patients to consume.
Well, how many confounding variables were actually involved in that? There's less, ostensibly, if it was in an actual controlled setting like that. That's what it appears to. That's what it sounds like. There's less confounders, but there's still going to be some. There still are going to be some, because how was the canola oil consumed and how was the olive oil consumed? And also, what were the baseline measurements in the beginning? That matters too.
Oil. They hear only one message from me consistently: extra virgin olive oil. There's so much data for it. But again, anybody just wants to dive a little deeper, that the seed oils are not toxic. I think it's the entire.
Okay, so we already covered in the last video why they are something that you should avoid. The primary reason I already just gave in the beginning, rhetorically, by asking rhetorical questions. But also the sheer amount of aldehydes in canola oil, and well, seed oils in general, the oxidation products, primarily of which, the primary of which is aldehydes, the deuterium concentrations, and the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, lesser down on the list, only because it's still up in the air as to how much of that has anything to do with increases in inflammation or whatever it may be that is associated with the consumption of seed oils. But I believe in that wholeheartedly, actually, just because of how stark the difference is. We're talking about a ratio of 800 to 1 when it comes to grapeseed oil. Canola oil, I think we're actually talking about what, like 2 to 1, so not really that offensive in that respect. Yeah, 2 to 1, also 2.3 to 1, depending on what you're actually looking at. So that actually isn't even that offensive by that criterion. But the deuterium concentrations typically still a problem, and also the exact fatty acid profiles are not particularly congruous with what we have evolved to withstand. Also, again, with the aldehydes and the oxidation products.
You know, hyper processed food, fast food, frozen food, preservative food.
Okay, yes, right. So what about those foods do you think is the primary culprit? Because if you start saying fat and protein, we're gonna have a problem.
Coloring food, but to isolate out and look at omega-6 fatty acids, it doesn't hold up.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So again, I'm actually thoroughly impressed by Dr. Kahn's performance throughout this video. There are still many problems, and I'm not saying that this completely exonerates him and he's someone that you should listen to. Again, it's isolated to this video in particular because he is saying true things to try and reduce things in these studies to that one variable, the whole seed oil thing. With the studies that are often cited is irresponsible. And it makes you a hypocrite, really, if you're going to say the exact same things about red meat and its implications in heart disease and mortality and all this other stuff with these longitudinal studies that are done. And processed meat in cancer and like colorectal cancer, for example. So it does, it's a you know, it's a problem. Now, here is where I get a little upset, I suppose you could say. Dr. Kahn is of the ilk, and again, I don't want to draw the I don't want to make a faulty generalization. I don't want to, make a composition fallacy. What is true of parts is true of the whole. But Dr. Kahn is involved in a community that will all the time, we just recently saw this, I think, as of yesterday, or 2 days ago with the whole Tylenol thing at the time of recording. People will come out and acknowledge these logical fallacies and these statistical fallacies like association equals causation and the faulty generalization fallacy and the lack of repeatability. They'll come out and say all these things, but it's real rich coming from these people because they'll only actually say that whenever a conclusion is arrived at that they disagree with, and or whenever a conclusion is arrived at by someone or a group of people that they despise. Like, oh, so now the truth comes spilling out of your mouth. So you do recognize that these things are fallacies. But as soon as it actually comes to to making conclusions about things that you agree with, oh, well, then it's a different story, isn't it? It's a different story. Now, then you want to make those fallacies again. Well, look at the increased risk that you'll have whenever you eat a bunch of red meat. Look at with respect to colorectal cancer and all-cause mortality and blah blah blah. Well, you can't say that Tylenol causes autism because, well, correlation doesn't equal causation. Mm-hmm. Okay, again, I don't like getting political on here at all, and I'm not identifying with. I don't play sides. I don't play the side game. I look at what is presented to me and then what is true. Is that true? Is that valid? And in this situation, isolated to this specific example, I couldn't help because that actually involves what I talk about regularly. I couldn't help but just laugh. You have a reason to be upset with a group of people that conflate causality and correlation. Now, granted, everything that I heard, they actually didn't do that. They said it was associated with an increased incidence. Good, that's correct. And they also said that it could increase your risk. Those two things are totally fine. So actually, that was responsible reporting. But if they didn't say that, and they said the things that are often said on that I react to on here, you have more than enough reason to be upset. I covered it with claims from RFK Jr. a few months ago, actually. Actually, I don't think they were claims directly from him. I think they were from the new guidelines or something, like a teaser for the new guidelines or something like that. And so it was a team effort. And so there was influence from a bunch of people. So you can't really blame one person. But yeah. So anyway, cool.
As Dr. Kahn said earlier, we need to be scientists and clinicians, and right actually above my head, Dr. Chris Kenobi, has
an important note to add is that not all clinicians are scientists, by the way.
done a masterful job of summarizing the science on seed oils in his new book, The Ancestral Diet Revolution. And, he has about 300 pages of pretty damning evidence from the scientific literature showing that seed oils are clearly associated with negative health outcomes.
Right, but again, that's quite reductionist oftentimes with all of these studies. The goal, if you're going to look in human nutrition science, because there are areas where you can do that, which is fine, is to get the most control or the most controlled studies possible. But also, that's only one criterion of a good study. So, for example, the reason that people try and approximate the greatest control is because they're looking for the closest approximation to an experiment that you can get on human beings. Fair enough. However, that also assumes that if something is experimental, it's therefore the best of the best. No, that's only one criterion. Why is that? Well, there have been studies that have been done by the American Diabetes Association that are experimental, that involve isolating rat islet cells, so beta cells from the pancreas of rats, out of rats, so isolating the cells, soaking them in solutions of saline, penicillin, a bunch of other antibiotics, then soaking them in 24 hours of a solution of extremely high amounts of glucose per unit of volume, and then also fat, a certain fatty acid, and then another fatty acid, and then taking those out after 24 hours of incubation at a certain controlled temperature, and then observing DNA fragmentation that occurs, or the rate at which it occurred, over that 24-hour period, depending on the solution that it was contained in, and then using those results to extrapolate to an entire broad spectrum to say, whether fat or glucose is going to cause diabetes due to DNA fragmentation in beta cells of your pancreas. What? That was an experiment, but that was also incredibly reductionist, wasn't it? So many things went wrong. You isolated, first of all, these are rats we're talking about, so their genes are going to be different. They're going to respond differently to different external factors or different external inputs, okay, as compared to humans. You also isolated the rat islet cells from them instead of keeping them in there and within the context of the overall physiological system. Everything is nexial. Now you've just removed one factor, okay? Then you soaked it with multiple different solutions. Multiple. Could that have any influence over the results that you observed at the end? Good. Okay. And is that something that islet cells are typically exposed to? Yeah. Okay. And then what you did was you incubated them over the course of 24 hours with a constant solution of glucose, one type of fatty acid, and another type of fatty acid. Can't remember the types. And then observed DNA fragmentation as a result. The kicker, by the way, first of all, they actually didn't explicitly show their control in the study. They kept referencing a control, but it wasn't actually listed in the study for some reason. But the kicker was that, yes, it showed that fat was associated with a higher DNA fragmentation, which doesn't matter because of how the study was done. I just explained all that. But the kicker was that glucose did the exact same thing, just to a lesser degree, but still to a degree that the authors would still consider significant. So then, okay, so you shouldn't eat glucose or fat then, huh? Because it's going to cause a failure of beta cells to secrete insulin, and that's going to cause you diabetes. Anyway, so that just goes to show that just because you do an experiment, that doesn't mean that that's only one criterion. Okay, then you want to be as broad as possible so that it's actually relevant to overall contexts, like our overall lives. Okay, and then you want to test the repeatability of it. Practicality of it is really what I was referring to. Is it practical to extrapolate that to diet and overall physiology? No. So you want to get practical while also being controlled. So just back to this point, you also want to attain statistical power. Statistical significance does not always equate to clinical or practical significance, so you always have to be careful about observing that. So there are ways to get as fortitudinous with your analyses in this sphere as possible. But there are still better inferences in terms of what we ought to be eating that can't be inferred from exactly from human nutrition science as clearly. There's still going to be more noise. So the best thing to do is refer to those, formulate your opinions from those, which is what we've done, and then substantiate those claims, if you'd like, as a cherry on top with the most rigorous reviews of the human nutrition science literature. I think that's the best way of doing it. So.
And, I would also point to a study that Dr. Kahn, I'm sure, is very familiar with as Ansel Keys' biographer, the Minnesota coronary experiment. And, that was probably one of the best done randomized controlled trials we have.
And that was actually due to a less strict set of ethical barriers. So we can't even do that study in that style again.
On dietary interventions, and in that group that
So and by the way, I actually cited this study in my book Contrainidicated. If you haven't bought this already, link in the description below for paperback, hardcover, ebook, and self-narrated audiobook editions, because I'm all about authenticity. Again, second edition is out now. I actually cited it doing in a way that I just explained that you should be citing literature, which is explain all of the hard science first, and then at the end go, oh, and by the way, cherry on top. It's not that like these in isolation really prove anything, but it gets you thinking. It serves to, I suppose, substantiate the claims because of the results. However, it's important to understand, given the limitations of the science that I'm very, very, very aware of, that yes, it was a higher mortality rate, but who's to say, just like I said earlier, that wouldn't have happened outside of the intervention too? I mean, heart disease takes decades to develop. These people had heart disease they had it developing for decades. So who's to say that they would have lived longer if they, would have eaten? You can't repeat the study on those people. You can't revive them. So anyway, yeah, a high saturated fat diet and a high polyunsaturated fat diet were contrasted in the double-blind interventional Minnesota coronary survey, which was also finished in 1973 and involved over 9,000 men and women. Similar to the last study, the outcomes were nearly forgotten until the original study data was found and at long last released in 2016. They came to effectively the same conclusions. So again, this is in reference to the Sydney Diet Heart trial before that. The best part is when the study's results were inquired about before the author passed away, he explained that they were disappointing and that is why they were not published, by the way. Yeah, interestingly. So that's the other thing. A high saturated fat diet and high polyunsaturated fat diet were contrasted. Okay, so was the diet the same? I can't remember. It's been years since I've even looked at that. But if it was an overall dietary change, I mean, who's to say that actually is an even bigger confounder there? Because it's not just one confounder, it's multiple confounders into one. So anyway.
Introduced, they substituted these seed oils for their saturated fat. All-cause mortality went up. I think the
Well, it's not that it went up. There was a higher incidence observed.
does show us that seed oils are problematic.
It shows that there is an association.
These are highly processed, industrialized oils.
That is correct, and also they are incongruous with what our genes evolved to withstand, and also they contain aldehydes that, once again, are in a concentration that is vastly damaging to the overall system at large. Just for perspective, by the way, glucose itself, people wonder why glucose is reactive. I've said, oh, well, it binds to, people hear that, oh, it binds to proteins. Yeah. When you look at glucose, if you look at the chemical structure of glucose, it's in a hexagonal shape, right? So you often see that depicted that way. That glucose is not reactive. The glucose becomes reactive when it unchains. It becomes linear in its form. There's always a certain rate, there's a certain amount of glucose that exists in its linear form at all times, sort of in an equilibrium amount. It's a tautomer of glucose. And this is dependent on temperature and pH, like most things are. That's basic chemistry. Because temperature actually carries heat, and heat will change the activity of electrons around an atom, for example. So temperature is always going to be influencing a reaction like this. But at physiological temperature, so 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, glucose exists in its reactive linear form at a 0.02% concentration. That's extremely small. You might be thinking, okay, well, that's an extremely small amount. That's really insignificant. Therefore, you might be led to believe that. Except it's not, clearly, because it's still reactive. It's the entire reason why you won't ever attain an HbA1c value of 0%. You're always going to have some glycation. It's still quite reactive, and it only takes a level of, let's go from 80 milligrams per deciliter of glucose to 110 milligrams per deciliter to be diabetic or pre-diabetic, and then above that, then you get higher and higher. It goes to show that even though it's 0.02%, it's still highly reactive. The reason that glucose is reactive is because when it's in its linear form, it exposes its aldehyde group. So carbon, double bond to oxygen, hydrogen. That is highly reactive. It's an aldehyde group. It is an aldohexose glucose. Fructose is a ketohexose. And by the way, you want to know how much of that exists in its linear reactive form at physiological temperatures and pH? 0.9%. 45 times more than glucose. Which explains why in vitro it's been shown to be 7 to 10 times more glycating, actually, than that of glucose. Now, yes, fructose is metabolized faster than glucose is, but still. And there's a buffer in your gut for fructose metabolism, but still. Anyway, it's because of its aldehyde group. Aldehydes are extremely reactive. So whenever I say that line where I go, aldehydes, even in vastly small concentrations, destroy lipid rafts, tear cell membranes to pieces, bind to DNA and actively mutate it. That's nuclear, that's mitochondrial. And in a high enough concentration will just kill a cell outright. That's why I say that. Aldehydes across the board, including glucose, do that. It's just that glucose exists in a small amount in its linear form. So, anyway, let's continue with what we were saying. Because yes, I was saying that lots of aldehydes in seed oils, lots of them.
And the bottom line for me is that they really have no role in human health. These are things that we did not eat for the vast majority of our existence as human beings.
That is the main thing that matters. And then you get into the evolutionary arguments like antagonistic pleiotropy and all that. That's the main one. And then the Walter Longo kind of lifespan versus health span point of view, which we already covered as well. Walter Longo seems to believe that sacrificing health span for lifespan is the way to go. So basically becoming docile and less propitious towards reproduction. It's associated in basically every organism with longer lifespan. Great. So do you want to live that long at the expense of being robust as an organism? Anyway.
And I would just strongly disagree with the contention that they are not harmful to our health. And I think we have voluminous evidence showing that they are harmful to our health.
Well, no, you don't have any evidence showing that they're harmful. You have evidence that suggests that they might be harmful. I have nothing against Dr. Ovadia, by the way. Just want to get that out there, including to make sure that Dr. Ovadia, if he's listening, also knows that. I don't have anything against him. It's just, yeah, it's not that harmful is another cause and effect statement. And you literally cannot inform upon causality in the science. It's not possible. Causality is an ideal, like God has been conceptualized as an ideal throughout history and even today. So you strive to attain it, but always know that you'll fail.
I mean, listening to this too, it's like from people who are not experts like you, right? You know, just wanting to understand what to do. It sounds like the obvious truth is remove processed foods. That's like the best we know. That's what we need to do. Highly processed sugar.
Yeah, but here's a question for you, Lauren. What makes these processed or really ultra processed foods so harmful, so contraindicated? I mean, it's a genuine question. Like, ask yourself that question, and then, you know, it might get your brain. If you ask yourself that question, here's what I should say. If you ask yourself that question, what it will do whenever you start thinking in that direction is start to get you to arrive at the major criterion that must be met in order to determine whether or not something is actually indicated for our health. Like, let's think about it. Okay, why are ultra processed foods so bad? Oh, well, they're loaded with simple carbohydrates. So what? Why is that bad? Our body has the ability to metabolize carbohydrates. Yes, you get an insulin spike, but then it's brought right back down if you're insulin sensitive. And carbohydrates can be very readily used for ATP production. So, I mean, there you go, right? Well, I mean, yeah, but if you spike it all the time, then you might become insulin insensitive. It's like, yeah, but you can just counteract that by, resistance training and making sure to engage in regular activity. Well, you still shouldn't eat them though. Well, why? Well, because they're still harmful for you. Well, according to whom, on the basis of what? Well, we talked about simple carbohydrates. Well, what about the trans fats in there? Well, yeah, but human beings adapt, don't they? Why are the trans fats so damaging? Oh, well, I mean, they cause a lot of oxidation products and stuff. Well, just counteract that by taking a bunch of antioxidants. See, every single thing, you can counteract it with something else, like in addition. So what is the actual reason why we shouldn't be eating ultra-processed foods? Well, it is a stark deviation away from what we are designed to eat as a species and what we are genotypically adapted to be exposed to dietarily. And so as much as you can sort of try and counteract a negative with another negative, those can oftentimes redound to even more negatives coming up. And also the negative that you're using to counteract the other negative is still incongruous with what your genes are evolved to withstand. And so then you're actually making the problem worse. You're compounding the problem, not making it better. That's why. So, anyway.
All that stuff is terrible for us. How can we come to an agreed upon answer for things like process or for seed oils, right? Like this, it's really just to get down to the fact and the science so that people can progress in their life, and make a good decision. Everybody's trying to do the right thing. Is that what that study is going to bring to us? where we can actually study the carnivore lifestyle and compare it to a plant-based lifestyle, not just against a standard American diet?
Well, you have to look into how you're even going to compare it, because comparisons like that in the area of statistics, again, quite noisy, to say the least. Again, you can do your best to control to the best of your abilities, achieving adequate statistical power, adequate repeatability. All of this costs some money, though. A lot of it. So there needs to be ideology behind that would make people more inclined to spend that money in the scientific journal upper echelons. So we may see that day sooner rather than later. Soon enough, but you'd have to design that study very carefully. And in terms of like how you would design the study, I say very carefully, yes, but what does that even mean? Typically, in order to really think about a really well constructed study, you've got to spend time thinking about that. So I don't know it at the top of my head, but obviously, I mean, it wouldn't really be a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, because that's usually used that's the gold standard for like drug testing. With diet, that's not really. I mean, you can do it with diet, I suppose. You can do it with diet, sure. I mean, the Minnesota Coronary Survey that I just read did it, which was done in I think in the 60s, I believe. Adequate duration is another thing that you need. And you also need researchers to be able to properly interpret those results, that understand that just because there are negative associated results or outcomes in one group, that doesn't mean it's directly causally related to the introduction of that diet, but rather because of the removal of something else. So a lot of people, they can have, or not even just the removal of something else, but also the presence, the still extant presence of something else. So for example, I did a video a while back on gout on carnivores. Some people have gout flares on carnivore whenever they first go carnivore. There's plenty of people that have completely cured their gout going carnivore, actually, and I received a lot of comments like that on that video. But there were just as many people saying, yeah, whenever I went carnivore, I get gout flares, or I got gout flares. And what I said was, well, we have to be careful. So here's some mechanistic speculation as to why that's the case, right? But also, most importantly, we have to be careful not to say that it is because of carnivore. Yes, it may have been the one variable you controlled for, but this is exactly why, just because an association can be a perfect positive association or perfect negative correlation, and only everything was controlled except one variable. Was it the addition of that variable, or was it the combination of that variable, so the carnivore diet that you embarked upon and started eating, with the other stuff that you were already eating with your current health status? What if you were, it's like a pot of water on the stove that's like right about to boil. If that's what your body is, and then you start doing carnivore on top of everything, well, then you can boil right over. That doesn't mean it's exactly the carnivore diet if you remove it, you have an amelioration. But also, if you remove the other thing that it's reacting with, you'll also get a removal of the gout, and you'll get an amelioration of gout in many cases, as I just explained. This is exactly why, even with complete control of variables, there's never really a complete control of variables, at least in this situation, because you're actually changing two things when you introduce carnivore into, like, you're not exerting full control, because if the carnivore diet that you're embarking upon is interacting with all of the other things that you're doing, even if those variables in terms of their activity are controlled, if they're now reacting with something else, you're giving them something else to react to, you've actually just introduced more lack of control, more noise. Logic.
Or vice versa, right? What can we do to make this clear for people?
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, I always fall back. I'm a cardiologist. And right now in 2023, soon to be 2024, the only diet ever shown to reverse atherosclerosis is.
Nope, Kahn. Nope, Joel. That's not how that works. Whatever you're going to say. There has never been any study that shows any externality being causally associated, such as reversing something, with another variable, because that's not possible to inform upon. Not to mention that even if it were, this is an appeal to ignorance fallacy, which is the idea that just because something hasn't been observed, it must either not exist, never have happened, or will never happen. That is a fallacy. For a reason. Do you think there is influence that involves money and incentive, really is what we should say? Do you think there's money and incentive involved in conducting these carnivore studies? Yes. And do you think that incentive and the money involved is a lot less than it is with plant-based studies and has been a lot less over the course of the last few decades? Yes. Now, that can change, and it's not to say that incentives are bad. Okay, it's bad whenever it becomes actually misanthropic, when it becomes actually deceitful and nefarious, which we've seen throughout history. Okay, I'm not anti-business models, okay, but you need to be aware of these things because that will influence what studies are done and what studies are not done. So those are the two responses that we must provide here.
Variety of studies using whole food plant-based diets, not
whole food plant-based diets. At least Dr. Kahn recognizes that there's more than one of those. And also, again, how many confounding variables are there? Therefore, resulting in not being able to inform upon causality here. Okay, because Joel, there are a lot of things that you can fix when going on a whole foods plant-based diet. Does that mean that you can fix everything? Does that mean it's the most appropriate for our species? And does it mean that something else can't do it even better? The answer to all of those is no.
Diets. Maybe it works with the ketogenic diet and the carnivore diet.
There you go. That is a good response. Again, I'm actually thoroughly impressed with Dr. Kahn's performance throughout this entire video. I cannot extrapolate the observations observed in an N of 1 sample to the entirety of the samples, of course. So I don't know if he acts like this in every single one of the videos, but here I'm actually not really that's fine, whatever. I disagree with his opinions quite vehemently, but here I think it's fine. Let's hope that doesn't change.
Maybe with the new Clearly and coronary CT angiography, it'll be a little easier to do. When Dean Ornish did it with quantitative coronary angiography, it still remains the state-of-the-art technology. It just now you don't have to do it invasive. But if we have an epidemic of cardiovascular events and we have a diet that's been shown to regress plaque, low
Well, that's a cause and effect statement.
Inflammation, drop hospital admissions and heart events by 50% in 5 years.
Well, those are, now you're not even just drawing causal inferences from associations, but now you're extrapolating results from a few samples to the entirety of the overall population, and also making a prediction model for 5 years out, and not exemplifying it and conveying it as a prediction model, but actually explaining it as if it is a fact about what's going to happen in 5 years. Also, 50% plus or minus what? Because that is going to be an average. And what does that equate to in absolute values in the meta-analysis, meta-analyses, or individual studies that you're referring to, and or?
Improve angina, improve erectile function, improve, claudication. Heart patients should be put on a whole food plant-based diet. They're generally
Okay, that is your opinion, Dr. Kahn, and I vehemently disagree with that opinion.
without seed oils anyway, so it takes, and they're generally without added sugar. They're whole food plant diets.
Well, both of those reasons could explain why people have ameliorations and at the very least alleviations going on a whole foods plant-based diet. Absolutely. Plus other reasons as well. They're not just removing absolute levels of sugar from their diet oftentimes. They're also blunting glucose spikes with fiber. They're also not eating as much with fiber. It fills you up. It's not exactly satiating, though. I received a comment recently that actually put that into good wording. So it's filling but not satiating. Yeah, that's basically what I was trying to say in that video. I couldn't come up with the words. You did, though. So, yeah. Yeah. So that all has influence over it. A lot of times they're actually increasing their absolute level of nutrition that they acquire as well because of how destitute diets are nowadays, the standard diets are. There's many things that are beneficial, in my opinion at least, on a plant-based diet in comparison to standard diets, of course. Trans fats are removed, not just seed oils, but actual like trans fats themselves, which are, I mean, those are tightly intertwined anyway, but so it's effectively the same thing. But yeah. Yeah. So the thing I will say though is that depending on who you are, a plant-based diet could actually be worse for you. Look into Kent carnivore Lee Copus. Fiber was destructive for him, it seems. That seemed to be the common denominator. So going on a whole foods plant-based diet, that may have actually been worse for him than just continuing to eat the low fiber standard diet. Who knows?
Extremely healthy diets.
No, that is in your opinion, Joel. It's fine to hold that opinion. You cannot say that that is a fact, though.
These research studies with Dr. Ornish, Mr. Pritikin, Dr. Esselstyn, Dr. Furman, they were lightly.
Joel Furman? Now? The guy that said that Sean Baker should be put in jail? He may have been being facetious. I've reacted to that video before. It may actually be a Patreon exclusive. I think it might be. Subscribe to the Patreon if you haven't already to gain access to 1 week early uploads, ad-free content, uncensored content, loads of antiquated videos from before I was ever a public figure, and loads of Patreon exclusive uploads that I used to do like every other week or so. Such as that one. So, yeah. Anyway, that man is frail beyond belief, frankly.
And vitamin B12, perhaps. I actually supplement my patients more than that in the clinic because I'm drawing so many damn blood levels. But these people improved with, 5 cents of B12 a day. And I'm not even sure all of them actually got that. So I think that remains, that remains the rock that has to be challenged by any other diet. Even the Mediterranean diet, there's limits.
No, there's not the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet, there are many diets consumed in the Mediterranean region. The Mediterranean diet is a constructed diet by epidemiologists based on foods that they observed people eating, and really they didn't observe anyone eating these things. They observed reported intakes of those foods in certain threshold interval levels. And what they saw was, okay, these foods that we're seeing, that we're trying to measure, these people consuming in this region, are associated with the most beneficial outcomes, or the most, beneficial outcomes is actually appropriate in this context, for the most part. And so then they constructed a Mediterranean diet based on those foods, irrespective of whether or not those diets are actually consumed in the Mediterranean region. No, those foods are throughout the region in the context of many different foods and variety of foods. So anyway.
Diet about plaque reversal with the Mediterranean diet.
Associated plaque regression.
There is some interesting data from Spain with plaque reversal with a high olive oil diet called Cordioprev. that's rather intriguing and very high quality and large. So anyways, that's, my little
Well, high quality is also an opinion.
piece I don't give up on. Show me a study that reverses plaque and decreases.
Right. So you don't give up on the appeal to ignorance fallacy. All right, cool. To be fair, we always got to maintain fairness here. You can form opinions based on an appeal to ignorance fallacy. We form opinions based on logical fallacies because logical fallacies are fallacies whenever you're trying to use them to prove a fact. You can very well hold an opinion that says, well, if aliens existed, we probably would have known by now. Now, people can argue and say, well, why would you base your conclusion off of a logical fallacy? But I just explained why you would do that. We do it all the time. Because otherwise, we actually wouldn't be able to really act or think in the world if we didn't do that. So, for example, the inductive certainty fallacy is the fallacy that just because every single time that an observation has been done on an event, a chance experiment, a trial, whatever it may be, just because the observation has been the exact same every single time the observation has been done, so the result has been observed to be the exact same, with no error whatsoever, that doesn't mean the next time you perform that observation, you will get the exact same result next time. So, for example, just because gravity has existed all throughout our existence, and every time that we've observed it, or observed the universe rather, that doesn't mean that tomorrow necessarily it will exist. Who knows, right? But you couldn't, that is a logical fallacy, yes. If you observe 1,000 houses and all of them are red, can you guarantee that the next house that you observe, if you were to observe the next house, could you guarantee that it would be red? No, you can't. Because you can't guarantee the future. You can't predict the future. Well, you can predict the future depending on the definition of predict that you're using. But you can't guarantee what the future will be or will bring. However, you couldn't act in the world if you didn't base your actions on certain assumptions or make opinions based on certain assumptions. It's a fallacy whenever you're using that as fact. Like, definitely, this proves that this will be the... No, that's not true. That's why we say that you can form opinions based on associations, but you can't say that they're causally related. You can have the opinion that they're causally related. That's not fallacious. That's not logically fallacious. So I will say that to give as much grace here as possible. Okay. If that's his position and it's based on an appeal to ignorance fallacy, fine, so long as he's not saying that what he actually said earlier, which is, well, the only diet that's ever been proven to reverse heart disease is this one, so therefore, this is the best one to go on. No, that's your opinion, and it's fine to hold that opinion. So anyway, just to be as fair as possible here.
Events and improves symptoms and improves erectile function, and that.
No, because those are all causal words.
Got a variety of things to offer to patients, but right now, serious heart patients could whole food plant-based diets without a question.
Well, yeah, that's where I would vehemently disagree with that, and they should transition prudently to a carnivorous diet that is bereft of plant toxins, plant anti-nutrients, such as fiber, which is both an anti-nutrient and a toxin, actually, just like oxalates are. Those are both as well, that are replete with bioavailable nutrition in the ratios that are most congruous to what our genes most evolved to genotypically withstand throughout history, throughout the most recent amount of time, sufficient enough to have caused full genotypic adaptations to our genome across the board. Okay, in the form of ruminant animals and the associated fat with that. Muscle meat, by the way. Not counting calories, not worrying about calories. Like, we're done.
Dr. Ovadia, I'd ask you the same thing. What can be done to come to this solution?
Yeah, so I think that I would encourage people to take control of their health, take an active role in their health, and do something is my first what I would put out there, because the standard advice around us clearly isn't working very well. Heart disease remains.
So that's also interesting. So I've also heard this argument before as well. I've written about this before. Just because the resulting status of the world, of the population, whatever it may be that you're looking at, is negative in relation to guidelines, that is, association doesn't equal causation. Is it actually due to the guidelines? So whenever he says they're clearly not working, he's actually drawing a causal connection there. Now, this is me being pedantic because I do agree with the opinion, but I wanted to get into it because it's an interesting, like when you realize that, you start realizing how much we actually draw causal distinctions between associations in our everyday life. They don't seem to be working. No. And I would agree that there is a causal link there. So, yeah.
Far and away the number one killer, despite our focus on lowering cholesterol and despite our push towards more heavily processed food diets, low-fat diets.
Well, what I will say is people like Lane Norton have made the argument that it's because people actually aren't following the guidelines. That's also an interesting argument. However, I do believe wholeheartedly that people have been following the guidelines. But of the people that aren't following the guidelines, even if it is now the majority of people, which, I would believe that. I would believe that, actually, especially given how I grew up and who I grew up with in my generation. No one pays attention to the guidelines. That's not how things work. What are they eating? Well, they're still eating a bunch of refined sugar and seed oils. All right, so I mean, what's the big difference there? So, but that does put into question, like, do most people follow the guidelines, and also, how are you actually going to measure that and observe that? What is your analysis going to look like?
Clearly, are not the answer, because if they were the answer, we would be seeing that in the data by now.
Not necessarily. If the guidelines are correct but no one follows them, who's to say that you would be seeing it by now in the data? That's why I bring this up.
And so like I said, I don't disagree that a whole food plant-based approach is one approach that can be successful. And I think any whole food approach, including a carnivore approach, can be successful as well. And I hope to get that data. I'm certainly accumulating the patients. And yes, those are case reports, but they're worth something. And
yeah, they are worth something. I mean, this is, again, a preface that he had to make because of the fact that people believe that anecdotes are all trash, which is just ridiculous, because anecdotes are some of the best you got. To just casually dismiss anecdotes is silly and irresponsible, actually.
We're seeing it more and more now. And so I continue to advocate, like Dr. Kahn, for a personalized approach for figuring out what works for that patient in front of you. And, I think we need to broaden the options. And one main thing that we need to stop is the villainization of red meat. And we should acknowledge that whole real food of all sorts, meat and plants, making that the focus of your diet is what's going to be beneficial for you.
Well, I know that he's trying to be inoffensive and he's trying to be conciliatory here. Don't toe the line, man. Don't do it! Don't do it! Don't freaking do it, man!
Excited for the work that I'm doing with my patients, the results that I'm seeing from my patients, like Dr. Kahn, and I think that's in a both of our experiences are very contradictory to what we see in the mainstream medical model, pushing a low-fat diet and LDL reduction, and that is clearly not working and not getting the.
Well, it's not associated with with beneficial outcomes. No. Association doesn't equal causation.
Benefits that we need to be getting, and I'm not one that blames the patient.
Buy the shirt. Buy the shirt. It's relevant.
For it, as we all too often do, and say, well, they're just not listening to us, or
Now, it's not to say that he's wrong and that these claims are wrong. It is to say that it's something to consider before arriving at your conclusion. So if you've already considered it, then it's appropriate to arrive at that conclusion. But I do agree. I do agree that typically there's a lot of people, especially when they're sick and they're trying to eat better. As soon as people try to eat better, they still fail. I did the same thing. It happened to me, so I know from experience.
just didn't start it early enough, and we just didn't do it hard enough. I think it's clearly not working, the low-fat approach, and I think we need to change our focus.
We have time for just one more question. I know that we're close on time here, but something that I think is important to understand the framework that we're all working within is there's a huge belief amongst people who consume an animal-based or carnivore diet, Dr. Kahn, that they feel that fundamentally a lot of the science and the data that has been out there has often been promoted by researchers who were paid off.
Right. Okay. So this is more of a problem, and at least has been more of a problem in the plant-based sphere than it has been in the agriculture or the animal agriculture sphere. The animal-based sphere. However, the problem is riddled throughout both sides, and it's important to understand. You have to understand the system and how it works. Scientific journals are run by individuals that have influence over what is published and what is not published, and also they have influence over the funding of studies. Now, actually, major businesses have influence over the funding of studies. Basically, what I was saying is that the researchers themselves are often paid off by these private companies, because journals themselves are not actually, they make their money based on subscription services by universities. They get their money by people paying to access certain papers. And they also get paid by research scientists themselves through grants that they receive to get their papers published as well in many cases. So it's not the journals. That was where I just made that error. It's with in this case, the actual researchers themselves are oftentimes paid by these institutions. So what do you think? Do you think that they're going to be inclined to publish some positive outcomes? What do you think?
Often by the Sugar Association. And so, you look at Ansel Keys' data, and that was, whether that was intentional or unintentional, it seemed very, very cherry picked. And you look at when cholesterol was being studied, it was simultaneously being studied with sugar. So is that a similar belief?
You tremendously abuse the science, and I'll forgive you, but you tremendously abuse the science. There's one example of one paper.
Okay, so I'm not sure what he's referring to, but what I will say is the sugar industry did absolutely pay off 3 Harvard professors to effectively falsify data and manipulate data to make it seem as if cholesterol were causing heart disease, when it seemed to be the exact opposite with respect to the studies that were done, with respect to the observations that were conducted. So
In the New England Journal of Medicine in 1965, that clearly the authors were identified as having taken some sugar industry money. Very disappointing. I think the lead author was Hegestead. He was a very well.
Yes, exactly. Mark Hegstead. Dr. Mark Hegstead. And no, it was 3 people, I believe. I think it was 3 Harvard professors, not 2. Either way, Dr. Mark Hegstead went on to help author the 1977 USDA guidelines that recommended that we cut fat and cholesterol because it caused heart disease. Dr. Kahn, I'm sorry.
Respected guy. But it was sizable money. It equated, I think, to about $50,000 in current dollars. It was much less than that back then. And it's awful. And, maybe the paper should be retracted. I went back and read the paper. It had no influence. It was such a dense science paper. It wasn't like it was going to be a splash that, millions of people read and started eating cookies. But it's awful. Dr. Keys, Zero, zero, zero. He wasn't one of those people. He was.
Okay, so then, so Dr. Kahn, what do you have to say about the 23 country study that Ansel Keys did that involved him only publishing 7 of them in his 7 country study? What do you have to say about that? Because the 7 country study omitted, well, about 15 to 16 countries. And when you plotted all the countries that were observed on the graph, there was no association whatsoever between reported saturated fat consumption and heart disease incidence.
Those authors, there's not a shred of evidence he was influenced by industry, that he had, and
So then explain why he did that. Because what was it, for his own personal gain? Or rather, sorry, that would support. Anyway, was it for, that would be the same thing is what I'm saying. Was it just because he personally didn't agree with the results? Like personally, no external influence? Like maybe. But there's suspicion there for a reason, because why else would he have done that?
grants, when NIH grants were just rolling out. Very, very poorly funded studies, but he got it all done. And he had, 18 international collaborators. So you'd have to say everybody was in the take, which isn't true. And he didn't have cherry pick data. You're wrong. There was never a 6-country study. There was always 22 countries, but
No, there was a 7-country study, Dr. Kahn, that is absolutely ridiculous. Okay? What you had was Ansel Keys conducting his 7-country study, which, after further review, is not to be confused or conflated with the 6-country study that preceded it. He did a 6-country study that did have data for 20 other countries, and when you plotted them on the graph, there was no association. So it showed a neat little curvilinear relationship. But whenever you plotted all the data points, there was no association whatsoever. There was a 7-country study that actually preceded that also showed a strong association, that was done more rigorously, which is actually not subject to those same criticisms. That was a different study. However, it goes to show, so you're looking at 7 countries in a prospective fashion. So you're looking at an association, which is entirely reductionist, not able to control for confounding variables at all. That study itself, which is still a problem, by the way. So yes, there is some nuance here in that it was the 6-country study that this was the problem, and not the 7-country study. Sure. However, the problem still existed. He still did that, which is the main point.
was so poor quality that he reported.
Well, I think that's the point, though. That's the point, is that he didn't show the data from all of the countries. And so whether I'm right or wrong, that's just what happened.
Yeah, but when you have a country that doesn't have death certificates like Mexico, so you're showing data. He chose not to show data. But let me just say, that was a paper in 1953. There was a hypothetical proposal. Then he did the science and published the science in 1970 prospectively. So it's the most abused. Please don't repeat it. Please don't show your ignorance. Don't say he cherry picked.
Well, so why?
Well, Kahn, Mr. Kahn, I'm not sure why you're being an asshole now. You were doing so well until, well, about 51 minutes into this video. I think you're being a little bit of an asshole here. What would you call that? So, I mean, look. This is all up for debate. It's all speculative. Is it true that he actually did it because he was cherry picking? Because he may have been paid off by the sugar industry? There's no definitive evidence of that. And in fact, I actually never said that in my book, for example, when I talked about Ansel Keys. However, it could very well be the case that also he thought that those countries were studied more rigorously. It was the best data. And so he reported that. it doesn't change the fact that you're talking about an association with 6 data points on the graph. 6.
Bringing it up is because
Wrong.
of the fact, not that I believe it, it's that it's widely believed. And so
well,
what I'm
I will
asking,
say his.
so what I'm asking,
Yeah.
sir, what I'm asking for you to do is to clarify for people who might be misinterpreting it, and that's hopefully what we're doing here. But to your point, it's been widely discussed, and that is a lot of why people believe what they believe. So
Well, so
you're saying it's not true.
perpetuating stupidity of others is not a game I play. His Wikipedia before 2009
What? Okay, so yeah. He's a what an asshole.
was completely wrong, but horrible. I wrote a lot of papers about him, and it's been completely rewritten and much more accurate in terms of, people have biases, and it's easy to go on Wikipedia and other sites like that. But when you really dive into the research, he studied 7 countries and 16 communities with 12,000 men. It got published with 18 co-authors in 1970, and it's authentic data. So if you hear people talking about he cherry-picked 6 countries, you really should scratch your head and probably listen to nothing else that they say. I mean, you really.
Well, except for the fact that there is a massive amount of truth behind that. The actual critique is still correct, that in his 6-country study, he left out 20 data points. Whether you want to say that it was because he was paid off by someone and had a personal vested interest in making it appear that saturated fat and cholesterol were causing heart disease, versus him just trying to be a responsible scientist, that's okay. You can have that debate. It doesn't change the fact that it was an association that had 6 data points on the graph based on a bunch of respondent data that had a complete lack of control involved in the study. Okay?
Good, because you just shut him off. I mean, everybody has a bias, so it's easy to criticize dead people. Not a lot of people criticized Ansel Keys when he was alive, and he made it to 100.5.
Well, so what?
And
So what?
Dr. Ovadia, how do you feel about that? Because I know that's a big fundamental difference between the two.
Well, yeah,
belief systems, let's say.
and what I would say is that science evolves, and I think we now have ample evidence, subsequent to Dr. Keyes's work, showing that saturated fat is not problematic, and there have been multiple studies, and even the American Heart Association has removed their limitations on saturated fat from their dietary intervention, from their dietary recommendations. So we need to acknowledge that science evolves. I am troubled by our current environment, where the vast majority of our studies around nutrition and heart disease are funded either by pharmaceutical companies or the food industry, and where our leading societies like the American Heart Association are largely supported by the pharmaceutical and the food industries. And I think that's a huge conflict of interest that we need to acknowledge, and we need to demand better. And so I like Dr. Kahn said, I'm not interested in attacking dead people. I would attack our current leadership in the medical community and look at the huge conflicts of interest within an organization like the American Heart Association, within the nutritional schools like the Harvard School of public health and Tufts, and someone like Dr. Mosafarian, who has taken large grants from the food industry, and to have them as the ones that are setting our policy around
Yup.
food, I think is very problematic, and it's something that we need to face as a society.
Yeah, it's I bring it up because I think it's so foundational to how people perceive of the information they're getting from the doctor they're speaking with. There are people who believe through and through that Ansel Keys and others have influenced the data, and then there are people who believe through and through that that's completely false, right? And so to have some clarity on that, I think, is important for people so they can understand, what, because that is what foundationally the science of today is built off of, whether we like it or not. So having that clarity is important. But I think we're pretty much at time. Is there anything else that you guys would like to add here in closing statements? Let's say we'll give it, each person gets 2 minutes to wrap things up. Whether you want to touch on a little bit more saturated fat or anything else that you feel we missed, insulin resistant topics that we missed there. But go ahead, Dr. Ovadia, you can go first.
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Kahn because he is willing to engage.
No. And I'll tell you why. You're about to say he's willing to engage in conversation, except the entire time throughout this video, he's doing a bunch of other work. He could have scheduled this conversation at a time where he didn't have any of that work to do. Could he have not? Is he constantly 24/7 working? Maybe. Hey, maybe. Maybe he is. Okay. But there's that, not to mention that his behavior at the end was completely unacceptable because Laura Knight Hughes was not being ideological. She was representing a point of view that is held by other people and getting him to comment on it. And he got pretty vicious there. So there's no thanking that.
These discussions, and so many of our colleagues aren't, whether they're invested in the plant-based world or the, cholesterol-centric, cardiology world. They're not even willing to engage in these discussions. And we need to acknowledge that science evolves. I'm sure Dr. Kahn, just like me, heard, the quip many times in medical school that half of what you learn in medical school is going to be proven to be wrong. We just don't know which half. And I believe it's incumbent on us as physicians to have open minds and to be willing to admit.
Not only do they not know which half, but also as soon as that half does become false or proven false, they will deny that as well. For the same reason. This is the same way that people say, well, just so you know, association doesn't equal causation. And then as soon as you prove to them that an association they believe to be causal isn't causal, they want to push back on it. They'll say it out loud, but how do they actually act?
When, mistakes are made, when historical concepts are proven to be wrong. And that is how we do best by our patients. But ultimately, like I said, I'm interested in empowering patients. I want to work with people who want to, take back control of their health, take an active role in their health, and do those deep dives that we referred to figure out what the patient in front of us needs, not what, these guidelines might, blindly say that should be applied to everyone when clearly that is not a good approach.
Well, we do have a guideline that is equally applicable to all human beings across the board, which is set by our genes under positive and negative selection pressures.
Awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Kahn, please, as well, anything you'd like to end with?
Yeah, I'd also like to thank my colleague. I was reading his bio, and we both went to accelerated pre-med medical school programs. I went in Ann Arbor, and you went in Pennsylvania?
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah,
so
correct.
we
Penn
were
State,
both baby doctors, which is
Yep.
yeah, Penn State. That's what I thought. Kind of fun. And again, I engage in, I've been with Sean Baker and Paul Saladino and Dave Feldman and the others. I go on these podcasts because we do share that common thread of challenging medicine, emphasizing lifestyle, expanding the horizons, using new technology, and questioning. And, we may have different approaches in nutrition. We probably have similar approaches on, imaging and lab analysis and probably, the role of exercise and sleep and all the rest. So it was a good conversation. a little lively at times, which I think is how it should be. And this is an old tradition. I mean, Dean Ornish used to debate Dr. Atkins on national TV. In the old days when there wasn't the internet. So I'm glad you're keeping the tradition alive.
Absolutely. I want to say, you guys, that this is it's a lost art, as sad as that is, to have a long form communication. And I think it's
Well, conversations are better than debates anyway. Because a debate is not about purveying truth. Conversations are. Conversations are interactive. They're collaborative. Debates are not.
most important thing that we can have today, particularly with echo chambers. I have no interest in being one of those. I look for truth to identify what that is, and you guys being the experts can help figure out what that is for society and help us get
Again, experts is an ambiguous term. We must be aware of that.
closer. So I commend both of you guys for coming on, and I brought you both on for a reason. You're both experts in your field. So I do think that ending on what we agree on is the most important. And I think that is, we need to get rid of processed foods for
Amen.
first and foremost, right? Just get them all out. That's the number one thing. But from there, and processed foods, it's going to look like most everything we have in the grocery stores and the gas stations. So basically go on the fringes and find yourself some good whole actual food. But like I said, you guys, really appreciate your time. Anything you guys send me or you reference, I'll attach below. And otherwise, we'll talk soon.
All right. I know that I didn't really talk too much at the end of that. But that's because there wasn't too much to talk about. It was the end of the conversation. So, I mean, there we go. Yeah, so again, I'm not really sure how to feel about Dr. Kahn from that. Towards the end, he started to get pretty, I don't know, pretty upset there. So, but maybe I'm reading too much into that. I'm not sure. But in terms of the overall conversation, the quality of the conversation, okay, it's fine. It's fine. I will say that it was a little bland at times because I don't think that we got into the really, really nitty-gritty important details. We just kept talking about human nutrition science, and there were no citations. And it's not a criticism of them to not have citations, because, I mean, you can't expect someone to have 20 papers on their side to access. But nevertheless, it does mean that it's going to be a little underwhelming whenever you're looking in a sort of siloed part of science and then also not citing any of it. So whatever, but we actually finished the conversation. So look at that. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should do that more often, where I actually watch the videos in their entirety, just split it up into parts. Let me know. Let me know if I should do that, because I can't make a 4, 5, 6 hour long video. So I'd have to split it up into parts. But let me know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But yes, with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Subscribe to me as well if you haven't already. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'm not sure what you're doing. Make sure to hit that bell notification as well, because, well, you'll be alerted of every single time I upload. Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? To see my name up on your phone all the time. Anyway, yes. So, with that being said, buy my book, Contrainidicated, as well. Like I said earlier, a closer look and revision of mainstream health axioms that have perpetuated illness, disorder, and disease for over a century. If you have not bought that book already, subscribe to the Patreon as well, as I alluded to earlier. And also, there are a lot of morons in the space saying a lot of things about a lot of things that just aren't true at all. Many of these morons actually call themselves coaches online. You've probably seen a few of them. The ones that are effectively meatheads online that think they know everything because, they can like bench press a certain amount of weight. If you didn't know, these coaches are actually able to call themselves coaches legally, based on having no criteria at all. They can just legally call themselves coaches and then be coaches. Isn't that awesome? So you can do the same thing. I can do the same thing. I'm Coach Edward Goki. Yeah, so it doesn't really mean anything, but it gives people a sense of authority in the perception of themselves, but also the perception of other ignorant people. Now, that puts a demand on us, the sensible people, to actually combat them. So what is a way that we can do that? Well, I'll tell you right now, fortunately, you have an ability to do that with a program that I'm affiliated with Carnivore Coach Peter with, a coach that has been coaching people for over 20 years, so he definitely knows what he's doing. This is a carnivore certification program, a nutrition and fitness certification program, certified by the National Academy of Sports Medicine and the Athletics and Fitness Association of America. This is the real deal, and it gets you internationally accredited, internationally certified as a carnivore coach. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, what it means is that you have the ability to speak one-on-one with medical staff for your clientele, to negotiate with them about their diet, interventions that you're recommending that they undertake. And also, it makes it easier for you to acquire insurance as well. Um, and you get a lot of benefits that you otherwise wouldn't get if you were just calling yourself a coach because you felt like it. So, with that being said, what is actually in this program? Well, I've contributed a few modules to the program. We learn about vitamin C, cholesterol, saturated fat, and heart disease. We learned about ketogenesis, gluconeogenesis, ketone metabolism, uncoupled versus coupled mitochondria, all that good stuff. And also the Randall cycle. I've also contributed 2 more modules to the program. One about carbohydrate reintroduction. Is that ever actually appropriate? Is that something that you should really worry about ever? Um, We'll get into that. And then also, we get into a little bit of muscle energetics, slightly. So carbohydrates and their implications in exercise, for example. So we get into all that. There's also features from Dr. Sarah Zaldivar on food addiction, Dr. Abs on NAD, and a few other features as well that I think are very, very, very important and worth all of that value. So, with that being said, if you haven't signed up already, refer to the links in the description below to get a hold of Coach Peter directly about this, and or to refer to our website about such an endeavor, and get a hold of Coach Peter about signing up, and let him know how you heard about the program, and you guys can go from there. So, with that being said, join me next time when we are reacting to more sensible discussions that don't involve a bunch of acrimony. I hope. I still don't know how to read that, but anyway, till then.